Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different for this video, so hang with me for a second there. There is a new kit over at By the Well for God. This is Famous Last Words. It has this amazing devotional in it, and I will be working through this devotional here on my channel and over on Instagram throughout the month. But for this particular kit, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I wanted to kind of share with you the behind the scenes process. So if you're curious about the devotional, what it's about, what all comes in the new release, I will link that video down below, the full unboxing. I broke it up into chapters so you can kind of flip through and see the different aspects of the release. But it has this beautiful like vintage theme to it. And so I like to get a little bit crazy, so I wanted to go kind of over the top with this kit. Now, I want to preface this by saying none of this is necessary at all. So I know if you are familiar with my channel, I typically Bible journal on my channel, and this is kind of over the top for Bible journaling. So please, if you are new to Bible journaling, have no idea what it is, don't think that this is what you have to do to Bible journal. This is just me being over the top. So you definitely can just get the kit, work through the devotional content, work with the stickers and the die cuts and things that are in the kit. There's plenty of content that comes in the kit as well as the new release that you could very easily and simply work through this devotional content. It does not have to be messy. It does not have to be crazy. You do not have to buy anything extra. You could just work through the kit with the kit contents. But I have a lot of things in my stash, and I have a lot of things that I like to play with. And so I wanted to incorporate that into this kit. And so that's why I'm doing things a little bit differently. So I did a poll over on my Instagram asking you guys if you'd rather see these pieces kind of sprinkled throughout the month in the Bible journaling entries. So as I did a process video, sprinkle it in, or do a whole separate video doing everything ahead of time. And the majority of people said they wanted everything kind of separated into a separate video, which is what I kind of thought was the better way to go. So that's what we're going to do. So this video, we are not going to be Bible journaling. I'm not going to be talking about the devotional content. We solely focused on creating these embellishment pieces and texture elements and kind of walking through those techniques. So if this is not for you, that way you're not having to pay attention to it in the process videos. Or if you're not a Bible journaler, but you're still wanting to know how to use grip paste and texture fades and things like that, this video will be for you. So even if you're not a Bible journaler, you can use these in art journaling and scrapbooking and traveler's notebooks and home decor, any other type of crafting that you do. Hopefully these techniques will work for that as well. And so I just wanted to kind of have something separate. You could also save this video, come back to it, and use these techniques with just different colors for different kits or different projects that you're doing. And so I wanted to kind of separate it out for you guys. So for this particular kit, I wanted to create a whole bunch of embellishment and pieces ahead of time. Because this is kind of labor intensive and kind of messy, I wanted to do this that way. Then when I'm working through the kit, I can just sit down, pull out my embellishments. They're already done and created, pull them all together and focus on the study part and not having to sit down and focus on the ink and all the craziness every time I go to do an entry. So I wanted to kind of separate it. This is also great. Maybe you're like me and you don't have a whole lot of time, or maybe mentally you don't have the mental capacity to sit down and do like an hour and a half long crafting session. This is nice to just sit down and do some batch work. So creating a whole bunch of frames all at once, creating a whole bunch of backgrounds at once, creating a whole bunch of die cuts all at once. Maybe you don't have the ability to sit down and do a whole, Bible journaling entry from beginning to finish, but you've got, a few minutes while you're sitting there watching TV or something and you want to just create a whole bunch of embellishments. You can just kind of assembly line that, stash them away, and then they're ready to go when you go to create. So rather than having to pull out all your inks and all of your supplies every single time you go down to create a page. So that's kind of why I'm doing it this way. I'm going to leave this here because there is a little bit of a glare. I don't typically work on this surface in my videos, but for what I'm doing today and it's super, super messy, I want to have my desk covered, and this works well with the products I'm going to be using. So everything will be linked down below. Again, everything will be linked down below. Even if I don't mention specifically what it is, it will be linked down below. So if you have questions about something, check that description box. But I wanted to share with you some of the different things that I have in my stash that I thought would be fun to go with this kit. So we're going to be playing with some of these embossing folders. Tim Holtz, I've been so inspired by his products. He does these demos throughout the pandemic. He's been doing them, and then now on Saturdays he's doing these demos. And so oftentimes there's product from his lines that I really want and I'm drawn to, but they aren't super easy to incorporate into Bible journaling. If you've ever tried to use distress sprays or distress inks in your Bible journal, yes, they can be done, but you do have to take some steps to deal with the bleed through. You can either prep the page or, you know, there's just a variety of different things. I've shown it on my channel, but it's not easy to just incorporate these products and techniques into Bible paper. It can be a little tricky. So I'll watch his demos, and it's, you know, a really cool thing that I want to try, but you know, how do I incorporate that into Bible journaling if I'm not an art journaler or a card maker or something like that? And so this is a great way to do it. It's creating these embellishment pieces that then you can insert into your Bible. And so he's got these amazing embossing folders that puts all of this texture into the paper. So this was just some gold foil paper, very inexpensive. I'm using the cheapie of the cheap of everything that I'm doing, but Tim Holtz does also have papers and cardstocks and things like that. I will link both down below. I'll link his stuff and the cheaper stuff, so you just decide what you want to do. The higher quality stuff you need to play around with because you're probably going to get better results. It's going to react a little bit differently with the inks and different mediums that we're using. But for me and my purpose and just using it in my Bible journaling, I'm going the budget friendly route, and I want to show you how that works. And so this was just some inexpensive gold foil paper from Hobby Lobby, and then I used this texture folder to get this amazing texture. And so I do want to talk about that for just a second, some tips, because I know you guys are going to ask. If you have questions about die cutting machines, I do have a Tip Tuesday all about die cutting. I'll link that down below. I have a Spellbinders Platinum 6. I like this one because it folds up. I'm not sure if they've discontinued the small one. They do still have the bigger Platinum machine. That's the one I'll link down below. It does also fold up, but it's a little bit wider, so you can do some bigger cutting with it. But this particular machine, and I've seen comments about this, is not necessarily set up to work with these chunkier embossing folders. These are different than a standard like old school embossing folder. And so you'll see that there is a sandwich on the base that uses an embossing plate. I don't have that embossing plate that's sold separately. So I've just kind of jerry-rigged it to work for my purpose. And so the sandwich that I do is the bottom chunky plate. And then I've got my folder. Usually I would have a piece of cardstock in there. When you're doing these super detailed embossing folders, you do want to spray your paper, whatever kind of paper that you're using, you want to lightly mist it, like 1 or 2 sprays front and back. Foiled papers do have a coating, so you don't necessarily need to spray the front, but definitely spray the back. And that's going to help that you don't have so much cracking. You'll see this cheaper paper, I do have a little bit of cracking in some of the pages, which for this technique works out just fine. I'm not worried about that. But if you're worried about cracking, you want to use a higher quality paper and make sure that you're misting the back of it because it's going to help it mold into this folder. So mist your paper. You're going to stick it into your folder. And the sandwich I do is the thick base plate, my folder sandwich with the cardstock, and then I actually use the embossing mat that comes with this machine over the top. Now, again, this is not ideal. I just want to preface this. If your machine gets messed up, not my fault because you're using it differently than what it says to be used, but this is the sandwich that I do. And then I run this through my machine. This mat does walk a little bit because it's flimsy, but I've had no problems with it. It runs through no problem. For 3D folders, you want to run through 3 times. So go through, back it up, and through again. At least 3 times you want to run that through your machine. If you're not getting a deep enough impression with this sandwich, you can experiment with adding some additional pieces of cardstock, shims underneath your folder. Depending on how thick the paper is that you're using in your folder, you may have to add some additional cardstock to get that pressure to get all that detail. So you just need to kind of play around. But if you have that Platinum die cutting machine, this is the sandwich that I've been using. Every die cutting machine is going to be different and have different sandwiches. So just keep that in mind. Okay, moving on. So there is that texture folder. And you can see this was the same gold paper. And I'm going to be showing you guys how we just grunge this up with paints and inks and alcohol inks and grit paste and all those fun, yummy things. And then this I can either use as a layering element, or I could go through and cut out the letters and spell words and use them as letter tiles in my entries. This piece here was the same embossing folder, but it was using a piece of watercolor cardstock that I had done some spray inks and things on. So very similar to this piece here. Ran it through that embossing folder, and then I went on to grunge it up and distress it. So I'll show you how we do that. So that is going to be one of the techniques that we show today. This one here is using this framelits piece. So these are really neat folders that Sizzix and Tim Holtz does. they cut and emboss at the same time. And so you do use like a smaller piece of paper. I've already cut all mine out, but this one, same thing. You're going to do a similar sandwich that you do with these deep 3D embossing folders, run it through 3 times. But the difference with these is that it actually impresses and cuts at the same time. So you come out with these pieces like this. So this is white cardstock. This is that gold foil cardstock. You can see all of that yummy detail. You can use this just as is. But I'm going to be showing you how to do these fun techniques with the Distress Embossing Glaze and some gelatos and distress that so it looks like an enamel frame when it was just white cardstock. So I'll be showing you how we do that in this video. Also going to be doing some custom die cut pieces. So stamps. I love stamps because they're very versatile. You can do a lot of things with them, but I wanted to take it up a notch. I wanted things to kind of be grungy and dirty and textured and really have a lot of life to them. So I'm going to create a whole bunch of these little labels ahead of time. This is using the Last Will and Testament stamp set. This was an add-on stamp set to the release this month. And I just created an inky background, stamped that, heat embossed it, and then fussy cut it out. Now this particular one I did coat in some Distress Resist spray just to see what would happen. This is kind of finicky. You can research this. I'm not going to go into this in this video because I'm not going to end up using it. But basically it like seals it. But it gives it this shiny look. And the problem with the Distress spray is that you kind of lose some of that softness of the oxide sprays. Oxide sprays are different than regular Distress spray stains. You'll see that it's like opaque pigment at the bottom. And so it gives it this velvety look. When you spray that Distress Resist spray over it, this was actually cut from this paper. You can see it intensifies the color. You lose some of that softness. So I won't be doing that same thing in this video, but I wanted to kind of show you the difference. It gives it that shiny look, and now it's waterproof. You don't have to worry about it, anything, reactivating or coming apart or anything like that. So we're going to be doing a whole bunch of inked backgrounds. I also wanted to incorporate some florals. So there are some floral die cuts in the Bible journaling kit, but I wanted some larger pieces and just some more textured layering elements. And so I have a few different floral dies. I'm not going to be showing all of them in this video, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to do a whole bunch of inky backgrounds and just kind of mass produce some backgrounds in solid colors and then cut them out so that way I have a bunch of florals on hand and ready to go. So I think that's pretty much what we're going to be doing in this video, just creating some different embellishment pieces. Again, everything will be linked down below. So let me go ahead, put you guys on fast forward, and we'll walk you through all these different techniques. I'll have timestamps down below, chunked up into chapters. So if you're wanting to see a specific technique, you can just skip right to that technique. So let me go ahead and put you guys on fast forward, and we will put these together.
Okay, so I'm going to start with this gold foiled typewriter embossed page here. And I've pulled out a bunch of distress paints. You can try a variety of different things depending on what type of paper you're using, but I have found distress paints are better for foiled papers. So I've got some makeup sponges. Some of my paints have the flip top and some of them have the dauber top. If you have the dauber top, you can just go straight to the page, but I found makeup sponges work great for application as well. So this first color I'm going in is with the new Salvaged Patina. I'm not covering the entire panel. I'm just adding it in some areas. Also adding in some Evergreen Bough, which is a little more green. And we're just going to give this a very like grungy patina look. I'm adding some water to help everything kind of move and blend and soften up the edges. And then now I'm going to go in with some ground espresso. And since this is wet, it kind of goes on a little bit softer and not as harsh, which is what I wanted. So I'm just working as quickly as I can because I want this to kind of stay wet as I'm applying things. That way it blends. Distress paint is permanent once it dries. So as long as it's wet, you can move it around. It does react with water. And so I'm making sure it's still got some water on that panel. And then now I'm going in with some alcohol ink. So this is mushroom alcohol ink. And this is just going to kind of deepen up some areas and kind of bloom across this paper. If you're using regular cardstock, you may not be able to get the same effect with alcohol inks. The reason this works on this is because foiled paper is slightly non-porous. It does absorb some things you'll see on the back of it there, but it kind of it allows the alcohol ink to glide across the top of the foiled paper. So I went ahead and dried all of that, and now I'm going in with a little more of the Salvaged Patina and Evergreen Bough just to kind of punch things up a little bit and add some more brightness over the top of the letters, so it really has that aged look. And really the key with this is building up layers. So experiment with different color combinations, different products. You can try gelatos, distressed crayons, paints, inks. I mean, depending on the paper that you're using, just really play around. So I made sure that that layer was dry. And then now I'm taking a very fine grit sanding block and sanding over the top, and I'm just barely touching the paper. And this is just removing product from the top of the letters. Because this foiled paper is a cheaper foil paper, it's very easy to file down past the foiled paper. So I'm exposing the white core of the paper, which is not a big deal because we're going to come back and cover that up. But this then, if you wanted to, you could go over the top of it with some ink at this point, and that paper will take the ink. But we are going to do some embossing. So I'm going to cover this with my EK Success powder tool because I want to make sure that my embossing powder only sticks to the areas that I want it to, which is the high points of this paper. So I'm going to take a clear sticky ink, this is Versamark, and just very lightly rub over the top of this. And so what I'm wanting is for the ink to kind of grab a hold of the highest points, which is the top of the letters, because I want to bring back some of the gold that we lost with all the paints and things. So now I'm going to apply some, I think this is Princess Gold embossing powder from Ranger, and you'll see that this is just grabbing a hold of any places where that clear sticky ink is, which should just be the tops of the letters. It may grab some of the texture, which is fine because it will blend in with the gold foiled paper that we originally used. But I want to just kind of bring back those letters a little bit. So I'll heat set this. So you do need to heat it until it's nice and melted. I know it's better to use an embossing tool to emboss with. I only have the craft tool, so it takes a long time to emboss this much embossing, but it gets the job done. It just takes a little bit longer. It's definitely better to have an embossing tool for embossing, but we make things work. So now let's brought back some of the gold letters, and now to add a little more contrast and age it up a little bit so it's not too shiny, I'm going over the top of that with some vintage photo archival ink. You do want to use archival ink. It's a permanent ink. This is meant for slick surfaces like embossed areas and foiling and things like that. So this will dry permanently over the top of that. Love all that texture and color and griminess. We're going to grime it up a little more. So you don't have to do this next step. This is a little bit extra. You can just leave it as is. But I'm going in with some grit paste. You can try texture paste, crackle paste. There's lots of different pastes out there. Grit paste dries gritty. It looks grungy and looks like I don't know, it's like corroded, and that is what I wanted. So I'm just using a palette knife. You can use your finger. You are going to get messy with these techniques. So you may want to wear gloves if inked hands and pasty hands bother you. But I'm just going in with a palette knife and just kind of randomly applying this. Like I said, you can leave this step off and then cut apart those letters and use them to spell things out, but I will most likely use this panel as an entire panel. So I'm going to set that aside. You do have to let grit paste air dry. You cannot heat set it. It releases toxic fumes if you heat set it. So you need to make sure you let that air dry. So while that's drying, we're going to move on to this darker panel. So I have a piece of watercolor paper. I just use inexpensive Canson watercolor paper, and I've cut it down to fit into that embossing folder. And then I'm going to use a splat box. This is just a box that kind of contains all my sprays so it doesn't get too messy. I added some water to the watercolor paper, and then now I'm going in with some spray inks. So I like to go in with Walnut Stain and Frayed Burlap, and then start layering on the black Soot. One thing about these inks is even that black is kind of translucent, so you can put it over the top of things and have the color kind of shine through. And also you can put oxides over the top of it. So oxides are a mix of pigment and dye based. So the blues I'm going in with are Salvaged Patina and Speckled Egg. oxide sprays. And so when I spray that over the black, because of that pigment, you are still able to see it. Now I do spray some more black soot over the top of that, but it will kind of peek through that stain, and just layer and layer and layer gives you that depth and grunge. But with the oxides, you can spray it over that black ink and still be able to see it. And you'll see that here as it comes through. That's what gives you that velvety, soft look, is from the oxide sprays. And same thing with that Frayed Burlap. That is a distress oxide spray. So I'm using regular walnut stain and regular black soot spray stain. The rest are oxides. And you just got to play around with what you like. A mixture of the two gives me the look that I'm wanting. So made sure that was good and dry. And then to deepen this up even more, I'm going over it with some regular black soot distress ink and just blending that into some areas just to kind of deepen it up even more. I want this to look kind of like cast iron that's been aged a little bit. So I want it pretty deep in color. So I'm going to spray the back of this. Ideally, I would spray the front and the back, but because inks are water reactive, it would mess up that panel. So I'm just spraying water on the back before I put it into that embossing folder. And then I made my embossing sandwich that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. And then I'm going to put that through 3 times. You will see, because I'm using an inexpensive watercolor paper, that it does crack. For this technique, that's not a big deal to me because that will all get covered up anyway. So I'm not worried about it. But you can see you can get that texture, but we need to bring out that texture a little bit. So I don't have distress crayons. I'm trying to decide if I want them. I do have all of the gelato colors. So I'm going to make do with gelatos for now. They are different than distress crayons. You can see videos online comparing the two. They do perform a little bit differently. But for now, I'm going to try to make do with what I have. So I'm using the gelatos. I'm using snow cone, and I think that's chocolate probably. And I'm going direct to paper and then just kind of trying to move it around. Because this paper isn't treated with gesso or anything like that, it just grabs a hold of the pigment. It's a little bit harder to move. So you'll see I kind of have to go in with layers. I have to kind of build it up, rub it in, put some more, rub it in. It's just continuously going back and forth and building up the look that you want. I did add a little bit of blood orange just for kind of that rusty color on there. I didn't add too much of that, but again, I'm just wanting it to look super distressed and grungy and gross. And so I'm adding a whole bunch of different colors and textures. And just keep going. You can always add more. It's a little bit hard to take things off. So I'm just adding a little bit at a time and kind of evaluating as I go to see, if I've achieved the look that I want. But we aren't finished. We will still be finishing off the letters and things like that. So same thing here. I'm going to sand off the top of these letters, which you'll see does really reveal the white core of the paper, takes away the ink and things. And this gives you a better idea just, how lightly I'm sanding. So it's just catching the highest points of that embossed paper to expose that. Now, at this point, you could go in and just use metallic ink. You could use, really any kind of ink that you want, and it will just stick to the white paper and show up. But I want this to be, really in your face contrast. So I'm wiping off any of the dust. I'm making sure that this is good and dry, but I didn't have it as dry as it needed to be, but we'll fix that here in a second. I'm going to apply my powder tool once again because I am going to emboss over this. So I'm just making sure I coat this with the powder because ideally I only want my embossing powder to stick to the areas where there's ink. I'm taking some Delicata Gold ink and just kind of rubbing this across those letters. This is a spongier pad, so you have to kind of be light-handed. At this point, you could just leave it like this with a very soft gold look, and this would work just fine. But I want to go over and emboss it and have it even shinier. So because that gold Delicata ink is a pigment ink, it stays wet longer. So I'm able to just go directly over the top of that with that same Princess Gold embossing powder. And here you can see my panel wasn't completely dry. I got ink in some extra areas I didn't want it because that pad is kind of spongy, but that's okay. While it is still powder, I can go in with a paintbrush and just kind of brush away the powder from any areas that I don't want it. Luckily, because we're going for that grungy, imperfect look, it does not have to be perfect. And so I'm not too worried about it. If there's powder in areas that aren't the letters, it, will be totally fine, but I just don't want it completely obliterated with gold embossing. So now I'm just going to go ahead and heat set that, and you'll see how that really makes those letters stand out from that background. It's getting so yummy, but I want to see a little bit more texture. So we're going to go back in with a little more gelato at this point. And the distress ink, or not the distress ink, the embossing powder. The embossed areas kind of act as resist now. They're kind of like a plastic. So it's a little bit easier to move the gelato over the top of that and wipe it off of those letters. So they're protected with that embossing, that gold embossing. And so now I can go and add gelatos or even add more ink if I wanted to, and it would just adhere to the paper and not to those embossed areas. So I'm just trying to rub that gelato off the top of the letters. If you get your finger a little damp, so like I add a little bit of water to my paper towel, ideally you would want to use baby wipes. I'm completely out of baby wipes, so I'm making do. So I'm just spraying a little bit of water on my paper towel. You can see I'm sticking my finger in there to kind of dampen my finger and then rub it across the letters. And that's removing the gelato from the top of the letters without affecting the stuff that's underneath. If you can hear kiddos coughing in the background, yes, we are still dealing with sick kiddos. That's the way it is in my house. So please excuse that. All right, so we're going to grunge this one up with some grit paste as well, but we're going to do a little bit differently. So I'm going to use this grime stencil from Tim Holtz, and this is just going to give us a different look, and you'll be able to see side by side at the end the difference between just applying it with a palette knife organically versus putting it through the stencil. It just gives you two different looks. This almost looks like something got like spilled over this panel and then got corroded. It's just so grungy, so yummy. It's definitely way thicker when you put it through the stencil like this, especially when we're laying it over a textured background like this one is. It adds like lots of thick areas of that grit paste, but that is what I want. I want it grungy and gross. This definitely is not the look for everybody. I get that. I love it. I have so much fun with this. So I'm just adding that in a few areas. And again, we do not want to use our heat tool to dry this. You need to set that aside and let it air dry. So I set it aside and finished the other parts of this video and then came back to it a few hours later. And you can see it dries with this yummy, like pitted, grungy texture. It kind of absorbs some of the ink from underneath, so it kind of gets colored. It's just gross goodness. I love it. And you can see kind of the difference between through the stencil on the right side, and then on the left side is just kind of organically wiped on there. And then we can color this. So I'm going to color this with some alcohol inks. You can color them with paints, which we'll do on the left side here. I'm going to do two different techniques. So on the right side, I'm going in with that mushroom alcohol ink. I tried mixing it with the statue alloy ink, but it was just drying too fast on my mat. So I'm going to go direct to paper. So I'm just taking that mushroom ink and just touching it to the paste. I'm not even hardly squeezing the bottle, and just the surface tension of the ink in the bottle is catching on that paste and pulling it out of the bottle. So it doesn't use very much, and this goes pretty quick. It kind of wicks across that paste and kind of settles into all the areas. Again, you can use a variety of different things. You can use inks, paints, gelatos, even the spray stains. You just play around with what works for you. I love the color of this alcohol ink and thought I would give it a try. So I'm just making sure I cover up all of that paste, and you can see, it's just so gross. I love it. So now I'm going to take a brush and some of that statue alloy ink. This one is an alcohol ink, but it's got like metallic in it. And so I'm just kind of dry brushing that over the top of those grungy areas. And just so it's kind of catching it with that dry brush look. And it's just giving some metallic areas to that texture paste. It's so yummy. I love this. To clean this up, you just use alcohol. So alcohol to clean the brush, alcohol to clean my mat. You don't want to get the alcohol ink on the non-stick craft mat. That's that white mat over to the right. You want to keep this to glass. So make sure that your surface is covered if you're using alcohol ink because it will stain anything and everything in sight. So just be careful. So now I'm going to show you a different way to color this grit paste. We can do this with paint. I have a water brush. These paints from Tim Holtz are water reactive. So I have found it easiest to use a water brush. That way I have a continuous flow of water. Makes it so that this is just quick and easy and isn't super, super saturated. The grit paste kind of grabs a hold of the paint if it's too thick. So keeping it kind of runny and fluid allows you to kind of cover that paste quicker and easier. So I'm going in with ground espresso, is that dark brown color. I also have Evergreen Bough, Salvaged Patina. I do have a little bit of Frayed Burlap there. I don't really use too much of that. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to use on there. So I'm going in with the ground espresso first. And then I'm going to use my finger to pick up some of the blues and greens and very lightly, not like I did right there, lightly go over the top. That way, again, like it's just catching the high points of the grit paste, like I did with that alloy, statue alloy alcohol ink on the other panel. And this is just going to grunge it up and just add lots of color differences. That's what you want. You just want to take your time using a variety of colors and layer and layer and layer. And that's going to give you the most authentic kind of distressed look rather than just going in with 2 colors, 1 layer, calling it done. You're just not going to get the effect that you want. So you want to build those layers up. So there's a look at the 2 different panels. You can see all of that grungy, dirty texture. I absolutely love how these came out. So you can see how easy it would be to just do a whole bunch of those all at once. And then you've got them on hand to cut apart, tear apart, layer, do whatever you want with them. So now moving on to these frames. So I already cut a bunch of them out of regular cardstock out of that folder. And I'm prepping it with a powder tool because we are going to use distress glazes. I have an embossing pen. This is the same type of ink that was in that Versamark ink pad. It's a clear sticky ink, but it's put in a pen. And so I can go in and just ink up the areas that I want. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can apply all the different powders at once and then heat it at once, or do like I'm doing here. So I'm going to do 1 color at a time. I'm going in with Crackling Campfire. You can be as precise as you want or as loose as you want. These are pretty detailed little die cuts. So you could really go nuts with colors and details, as much time as you want to take with that pen. I don't fuss too much. I just kind of do like general splotches of color. And by doing 1 color at a time, I'm able to save my powder. So you can see there, I just dumped the powder into the jar. I heat set that Crackling Campfire until it was melted. And then now I'm moving on to the next color, which will be Salvaged Patina. Again, you could just leave it all powder. So do the Crackling Campfire, don't heat set it. Go in and ink up your blue areas, apply your blue powder, tap off the excess, don't heat set it, move on to the green, yada, yada, and then heat set it all at once. However, you have a possibility of the powders kind of contaminating each other when they're not heat set. And so then you wouldn't be able to put it back into the container. It would be, wasting that powder that I had there on the paper. So yes, it takes a little bit longer to, stop and heat set each color, but I found that it just saves as much powder as I can and just works for me, but you do you. So I'm just going in 1 color at a time, 1 area at a time, just, picking, doing all the flowers, doing all the leaves, and just kind of adding splotches of color. That green there is peeled paint. Distress glazes are translucent, so they are not opaque like typical embossing powders. And so if you have a colored cardstock underneath this, it's going to change the color of those glazes. So just keep that in mind. Now I'm taking the embossing dabber, same thing. This is just a dabber bottle with that clear sticky ink, and I'm going over all of the areas that haven't been colored yet. I'm trying not to get it onto the flowers. If it does, it's not the end of the world, but I'm just trying to cover up the frame. And then I'm going to coat this in antique linen embossing powder, but I want it to be kind of distressed. The next step I'm going to use is gelatos to kind of grunge this up, and gelatos stick to the bare paper. So I want some of that paper exposed. So I'm just going in with a brush and my finger and kind of dusting off the powder off of the high points, just kind of just stressing it a bit, just trying to have some areas that are naked so that it will grab a hold of the gelato, which you'll see here in a second. But I can save the rest of that embossing powder, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat set the antique linen. The embossing glazes emboss pretty quickly. And then now I'm going in with that chocolate gelato. Again, you could use distressed crayons if you have them. I do not, so I'm making do with these. And they seem to do okay. So you're going to go directly over the top of this. This looks gross, hot mess. Just bear with me. You're going to get that pigment on there and then blend it in. Now, the videos I saw from Tim Holtz, he uses a like a distress brush, which I do have on my list of things to get. I think it would make this much easier to do with his little stencil brushes, but I don't have those. So I'm just using my finger and a paper towel to kind of buff that color into all the nooks and crannies. Again, it's going to grab a hold and be darkest in the areas where the paper is exposed and in the crevices, so that gelato is just straight pigment. It's just waxy pigment color, and it's just going to settle into all of those nooks and crannies and give it that dirty, grungy, antiqued look. When this is done, it almost looks like porcelain or cracked enamel. It's crazy that this is just cardstock covered in embossing glaze and gelato. It has such a neat look to it, and it adds some weight and substance to the die cut. So it's a little bit easier to work with when you're adhering it into your project. But you can see I'm just building up layers and layers of color there. And then I'm going to get my finger just a little bit damp. Again, you could use a baby wipe just to kind of dampen your finger. And I'm gliding that over the top of this die cut piece. And that's going to remove the gelato from the high points of this piece. Gelatos are water reactive like distress products, and they are permanent once they're heat set and dry. And so as long as my finger is damp and I haven't heat set this piece yet, I can wipe off gelato. So you could completely wipe it off and start all over again. If you don't like it or want to do a different color or it's too much for you, it won't come off of the areas where the paper was exposed, but anywhere where the distress glaze is, you can remove the gelato. But see, you can see those two different pieces there. And then I do heat set it just to make sure the gelato is set, everything is dry, melted, and it's permanent at that point. So I love how just grungy and antiqued that looks. Depending on how much of that antique linen embossing glaze you take off, kind of gives it a different look. But I love that. And you can change up the color combinations and how much detail you put in with the colors and that kind of thing. So moving right along, I have this panel here. This was colored the same way as that darker typewriter piece was. So you can go back and see the colors that I sprayed on there. But this was created the exact same way. But I'm going to load this up in my stamp positioning tool. I'm going to coat it with my powder tool because we're going to do some more heat embossing. I have this kind of label stamp from the Last Will and Testament stamp set from By the Well for God. I'm going to ink that up with a clear sticky ink, that Versamark. I'm going to stamp that down on there. A sweet subscriber sent me that little tool to use. I think she's in the process of going to have a shop eventually, so I'll share that when she does. It makes it so easy for pressing your stamps in your tools. It's awesome. So I'll be sharing that once she has a shop open. But I'm going to coat that stamp with that same Princess Gold embossing powder. And because I added the embossing tool, right, powder tool first, the embossing powder only sticks to the area that is stamped. I'm going to go ahead and heat set that, and that is going to be it. Very simple. So I already have one fussy cut out, and then I like to go in with some more of that black soot distress ink and a blending tool, and just add some of that ink to the edges where that white core of the paper is exposed. And this just kind of finishes off that die cut piece. That way it really looks like a finished embellishment. Here you can see the difference between the one on the left was sprayed with that resist spray and the one on the right was not. And you can see how the colors are different between those two. All right, moving right along, we're going to work on those inked panels to die cut the flowers from. So I'm using watercolor paper once again, and I sprayed the paper with water, and then now I'm going in with the different color families. So for this one is going to be blues. I like to lay a layer of regular distress spray stain first. So I'm using Broken China, Mermaid Lagoon, Tumbled Glass, I think are the three that I'm using there. They're the colors from my color swatches over on my Instagram for the kit. If you search hashtag Lindsey Color Swatches on Instagram, you'll find the famous last words kit photo. Swipe to the right, and it's all the different ink swatches. Those are the colors that I used for all the projects today for the sprays that I'm using. So I dried the spray stains, and then now I'm going in with a layer of the oxides. So I found it best to lay down a layer of the spray stains, regular stains first, dry that, and then go in with your oxides. You can do all oxides or all spray stains. I like to mix and match. They just give you different looks, so you just need to play around. It does not have to be perfect because we're going to be die cutting out of this. So oxides react with water to have that oxidized look. So I do spray some water on there to give it that soft velvety look. I mix in a little bit more spray stain just to kind of punch up the color. The spray stains are a deeper, richer color. And so if I'm wanting some spots of deeper, richer color, then I use the spray stains. You'll see as I start to dry it, I do also add some little droplets of water. The Distress sprayer that I have my water in, if you just halfway pull the trigger, it gives you these big droplets. If you pull it all the way, you get a fine mist. So I'm just halfway spraying it, gives me those little droplets as it's drying, and that gives me even more texture. So I'm just going to move through the color families pretty quickly here. I'm going to lay down a piece of watercolor paper. I am still working in the splat box. That just keeps my area clean. So I add water, add my spray stains. For this combination, I'm using Candied Apple, Abandoned Coral, and Spun Sugar. I'm going to dry that spray stain layer, spritz it with a little bit of water, and start adding some oxides and then a little bit of spray stain. Spray stain, it just depends on what I want more color, whether I want more of that spun sugar or maybe I want more of that really intense red of Candied Apple. I just pick one of the spray stains, and that's the one I spray on that second layer with the oxides. For this one, yellows, we're doing Fossilized Amber and Wild Honey. So again, a layer of spray stain, drying it, adding a little bit of water, adding the oxides, a little bit more spray stain, a little bit of water, and drying it. Very quick, very easy. This is not anything fancy or difficult to do. You can play with a variety of different color combinations. This one here is Forest Moss and Mermaid Lagoon. You do want to shake up your oxide sprays because they are pigment and dye. You have to get that pigment kind of mixed in, so make sure you shake your oxide sprays. The oxide sprays are the ones that are giving it that kind of velvety look, so that grayish green is from the oxide sprays. All right, last but not least is going to be Tattered Rose and Spun Sugar. I love just how quick and easy it is to create these panels. So you could sit down one afternoon and just make dozens and dozens and dozens of backgrounds in all kinds of different colors. And then you've got them on hand for die cutting alphabets, die cutting florals, frames, all kinds of things out of these. And they're just ready to go. You're all done being messy all at one time. And then you've got backgrounds to work with. So there's a look at the 5 that I created. Those, again, are colors that coordinate with the Famous Last Words kit. Since I'm going to be doing some layering florals, I like to add double-sided adhesive to the back of these panels before I die cut them. So I have this roll of adhesive from scrapbook.com. I will link it down below. This stuff is amazing. And so I'm just going to make sure that I pretty much cover the back of the panels. I don't completely cover them. And this way, when I die cut my floral pieces, they already have adhesive on them and they are ready to go. It does also put adhesive on the back of the entire floral, so then I can just peel that backer off and stick it like a sticker right into my Bible. I don't have to use any kind of glue or anything like that. So these are those panels with the adhesive on the back, and I'm going to die cut the florals. So I have this, I think this is brushstroke floral. Brushstroke Flowers 2, and then I also pull out Brushstroke Flowers 1, and I'm going to lay all the leaves on the green one, cut them all out at once so I can cut out tons and tons of leaves out of the green, and then I'll just go through and lay out the different florals on the different colored panels and just cut out a whole bunch of different florals in different colors. And then we can get to assembling. These particular brushstroke florals just have a few layers. They're pretty simple to put together. I have shown some other floral dyes in the past, like from Altenew and things like that, that are very labor intensive, have lots of layers, but these are pretty quick and easy. So they do have, like I said, layering elements. So there's elements that are meant to be darker or different colored. So I've pulled out the bottom layers of the florals. You can see them up at the top of the screen there, but I left the layering elements in the panel, and I'm just going in with some darker ink. This is Mermaid Lagoon. I'm sorry, no, it is not. It's Peacock Feathers. Peacock Feathers, and I am inking up those darker pieces while they're still in the panel. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. So you can do it this way where you ink it up directly in the panel. You can see I also inked up the center pieces with some chipped sapphire just to give it a different color tone. And then these particular dyes, when you die cut them, it also impresses or embosses lines onto the flower base so that you know exactly where to put these second layered elements. I know there's lots of videos out there on YouTube showing exactly how to assemble these. They are very simple. Like I said, they have those lines on them. You just can't really see them on the camera, but that way you just know exactly where to put those layers. And because they already have the adhesive on the back, you just pull that backer sheet off and stick it right directly to the flower, and it's good to go. So I'm just popping out. There's like little cutout areas on those flowers. So I'm cutting those out, but I am leaving the backer sheet on the main part of the flower because I'm going to be sticking these in my Bible, but I'm not ready to stick them in there yet. So I'm just being careful with what pieces I take the backer sheet off of. So I'm just taking the backer sheet off of these smaller pieces that get layered on top of the flowers. I hope that makes sense. It's hard to catch it all that detail in on video and trying to get through all of these different processes. This is not meant to be like a how to assemble these flowers type video. There are those out there. All right, here is a second option for deepening up those layering pieces. So you can see I still have everything in the panel. It's been run through my die cutting machine, but I did not pop them out. I just left them in, and I'm just taking a paintbrush and dipping it directly into the spray stain and using it like watercolor to color over those darker areas. So I'm just picking the darker color of whatever I used on these panels. So for this particular panel, it's going to be I believe mustard seed that I'm using to just ink up those darker pieces. And with this, you get more of that watercolor look. When you blend it on, it just gives it kind of a softer, more diffused color. This kind of matches better with the look of the panel in its entirety. So you can see that deepens up the color. If you want to lighten color, because these are watercolor or on watercolor paper, you can do that. So I'm just taking a wet paintbrush, just plain water, and rubbing it, scrubbing it over that lighter piece, and then mopping up the color with a paper towel. Or you can go in with distress paint. So there's a lot of different ways to color these while they're in the panel. You can also, cut these out multiple times out of darker colors if you wanted to, and then you have a lot of pieces to mix and match. I was just trying to kind of not have 20 different colored panels and just kind of work with what I had. So there's everything all assembled. Again, they're very simple to assemble. They have the lines impressed into them. So you just take apart the pieces, stick them down, they're good to go. But all of these have the backer sheet still on the back of the main elements. So there's a look at everything that we created in this video. There's quite a bit there. Again, check out the timestamps if you want to go back and see something again. All of these will be used in future videos as I Bible journal my way through that kit. But it was just a lot of fun. I hope that gives you some inspiration for some different ways to use the products. And you can take this and use this with a variety of different things and color combinations, and hopefully it just inspires you. So if you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below. Check out the description box for links to everything that I used today. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.